Hello, I'm Nina Hartley, and we're here today to talk with Ernest Greene about his new book, Master of O. So Ernest, where did your original inspiration for writing Master of O come about?
Well, it results in part, of course, from having read the original story of O when I was quite young and finding it a very fascinating and frustrating book that had some things in it that were of great interest to me and that really, even though I had no direct personal experience, rang true, and some other things that just didn't make any sense. And I always wanted to sort of fix it. And one of the ways in which I wanted to fix it was to give some kind of an identity to the dominant men in it, because as I was to learn from reading other BDSM-oriented fiction and seeing BDSM-oriented entertainment of various sorts, is that it was almost always storytelling from the submissive woman's point of view, which leaves that person's partner a complete enigma and a mystery, and leaves also a complete enigma and a mystery what any woman would want with one. So, and I had never seen, I might add, a portrayal of one that would be particularly of interest to anybody. So I thought it would be time to give a voice to dominant men.
Well, certainly. I mean, I know as a submissive woman, you know, what it is about guys like you that gets to women like me. And they're never portrayed in the book. You're absolutely correct. It's always, they're always an enigma or a cipher. It's like, what about him is so amazing that she would do this? So, and I've read the book, and he has done a bang-up job of getting us to understand why would a woman do such a thing. So while the main characters are based on the legendary story of O,
Yeah.
do you add a lot of your own sexual details into the work when you write?
I'm not going to run away from it. No, absolutely. I mean, there's 30 years of research in this.
Personal research.
Personal research. Couldn't get any more personal. And during that time, I learned a lot about what could be good features of being with a dominant man or being a dominant man, and other features that were challenges for being a dominant man or living with a dominant man. I wanted to address all of those things with the complexity that I think they deserve.
Works for me. So Ernest, does it surprise you that BDSM has become more accepted and mainstream over the years, and that your fetish movies are bestsellers for the company Adam and Eve?
Not really. I think that there's a long-standing basic human fascination with the link between sexuality and aggression. Without a certain measure of aggression, there wouldn't be any sexuality. But at what point does the aggression become a recognized part of the sexuality, and how can it be structured in such a way as to enhance the pleasure of both partners? I've always felt that this was an important area to explore, and that a lot of people would be interested in it if it were explored from that perspective. If it were explored from the perspective of sex play between consenting adults as opposed to some kind of weird, scary, culty, violent, ugly, evil thing that people did because they were compulsive and crazy and couldn't help themselves and this was the only thing they could do. That has not been characteristic of any real kinky people I've ever known. I've known some strange kinky people. None of them fit that description whatsoever.
So Ernest, did it surprise you that BDSM has become more accepted and mainstream over the years, and the fact that your BDSM movies for Adam and Eve are bestsellers?
Not really. I think there's been an expanding range of sexual experimentation in this society as it's become more open to more different kinds of sexual expression, and that inevitably in the search for what turns an individual on or what makes life hot for a couple, they're going to try this sort of thing and that sort of thing, and a certain percentage of them are going to find their way to BDSM, and for some it will work and some it will not. But it's there for them.
I know, Ernest, that this question piques you out to no end, so I'm going to ask it anyway.
Okay.
So, Ernest, how does one often come to the realization that they find sexual pleasure in pain?
I don't think anybody finds sexual pleasure in pain. I think the greatest misunderstanding about BDSM sexuality is that it's pain-based. No, it's pleasure-based. If it were pain-based, no one would want to do it. Things that people experience as pain, they are naturally inclined to avoid. I'm inclined to view it as strong stimulation, like hot peppers or riding on a roller coaster.
Wasabi!
Yes, but because the circumstances are controlled and everything is negotiated in advance and everyone knows the environment is safe, they can play around with the idea of that kind of strong physical stimulation, of psychological circumstances that could be challenging. All of these things are fine within the safety of negotiated consensual arrangements between consenting adults.
So I know a very common question, Ernest, is people think that BDSM is about finding pleasure in pain. And what's your response to that?
I don't think anyone finds pleasure in pain. BDSM is not about pain. It is about pleasure. It is about strong sensations of one kind or another and exploring them in the same way that one might explore the pleasure of eating hot peppers or riding a roller coaster because it's under controlled circumstances where people feel safe because they've negotiated limits. BDSM is pain without fear and violence without anger. If you take out the things that make those kinds of activities that might trigger that frightening, then you have the possibility of viewing it as sexual stimulation of an unusual sort.
So someone says to Stephen, "Oh, is your slave not your girlfriend?" What's the difference between a slave and a girlfriend?
Well, I think if you asked either a sex slave or a girlfriend, they could probably sort that out pretty quick. But basically, even though two people might not be in a BDSM space at all times, there is an established dynamic between them in which one partner is basically dominant where sex is concerned, and the other partner is basically submissive where sex is concerned. When it reaches a certain point of intensity and commitment, then it could be said that one partner becomes the slave of the other partner strictly for sexual purposes. There are those who choose to expand that into other aspects of the way they live. I do not criticize them. I do not say they should not do that, but I do not think that that is a model that applies to most people who have an interest in BDSM.
So, Ernest, how do you punish a masochist?
I wouldn't know. I don't punish anybody. That's not part of my dynamic. I think the whole idea of people punishing each other for various misdeeds as adults is pretty preposterous. And frankly, I think it's just an excuse. It's an alibi for people who like to play that game, but every single person makes their own BDSM. Every couple makes their own BDSM. That's not part of mine.
You've mentioned that you're hardwired for this lifestyle and have kinkdar for those who share your interests. Is it true? Are people hardwired for kink, or can they be shown to like it if they've never been interested before?
I think that it depends on the person. I think some people really are orientationally kinky, in the same way that they would be orientationally gay. I'm someone who's never had a non-kinky sexual fantasy in his life, and who had some, experimental form of BDSM play with his very first girlfriend and everyone ever after. But that's not true of everybody. For some people, there has to be a process of discovery. They have to know that it's there as an option, and then when they see it, they go, yeah, that looks interesting. I have had fantasies like that. I would like to try that. And there are people for whom it is an occasional diversion from the usual thing, and I don't think those people are necessarily hardwired for it. But there are those for whom it is as defining a sexual characteristic as a thumbprint.
Did your interest in a kinky lifestyle begin with the original story of O Book, or was it just in you early on, do you think?
I think, more the other way around. I was interested in the story of O because of what it was about. I already knew that about myself. I can't remember a time when I didn't know that about myself. I was always fascinated with bondage and with images of power and so on and so forth. I always was interested in the idea of the dynamic of power and sex together. And of course, at that time, that book was the book. So when I got to an age where I could read that book, I read that book and I found some things about it that definitely resonated, yet some things that felt right. And then there seemed to be some things about it that felt wrong. Even though I had not at that point had any personal experience, this just didn't seem like what it would be like. So I began my own research pretty early in life and have been conducting that research ever since.
So this question is something the ladies might like. There's a line in Master of O, quote, "She was alone with the Minotaur in his labyrinth." And a comment that I made that being with you is like dancing with the Minotaur. So what does the Minotaur signify to you?
I think there's a certain kind of woman who loves a good monster. You know, I mean, whether it's Beauty and the Beast or any of a number of other, you know,
Oh God, Quasimodo.
Phantom of the Opera,
Yeah.
you know, Hunchback of Notre Dame. I'm not sure I'm flattered by these comparisons, but nevertheless, there is an appeal in the pure id that's represented by these kinds of figures, uncomplicated by much of anything
And
else.
but it allows her to release her own inner id as well.
Absolutely. The thing about being with a minotaur of that kind is that you get to be what you get to be because you know he's going to be what he's going to be.
And I like that, what I always liked about having sex with you from the very beginning is I never felt judged for what it was I wanted from you. And
Likewise.
a lot of women who have very strong sexual desires can feel judged by their partners for various reasons. And I think one of your many appeals, besides the skill set that you bring to it, is that your female partners never feel judged by you for their desire.
No, hardly. I have about as much judgment in that regard as a minotaur. You know, it is just the way I am, and it's just the way they are.
Good. What is the appeal of ownership by a man to someone like O for those who are not in the lifestyle?
For some people, the master-slave relationship provides an organizing principle. If you're the kind of person for whom disorder is the most frightening thing in life, and it's nice to know where you stand all the time, you can construct a dynamic with another person who's in that same way constructed, and thereby know always when you're doing things right. I think that's the appeal of that, you know, it's that you don't have to wonder if you're in the right space in a relationship because the relationship is defined in terms of its boundaries by its very nature. So as long as you go with those protocols, you're always right, you're always desirable, and you're always doing fine.
Good point there, because people at home might not know that before I met Ernest, I had no formal training in BDSM. Some of the fantasies sort of seemed fun, but it wasn't an organizing principle for me. But so I was learning how to be a partner for him. Oh my gosh, am I going to do it right? And the best thing you ever said to me the first time we made love was, "Don't worry, I'll never let you be displeasing."
Exactly.
I liked that because it was very comforting to me, because I knew that I didn't have to worry about, oh my gosh, am I doing this right? Because you say something.
You never have to wonder in that situation. You know, BDSM means never having to say, what am I doing here? Am I doing this right? Because if you're not doing it right, you'll hear about it.
Lovely. What did you personally take away from writing this book? How does revisiting the world of O give you satisfaction?
Well, for one thing, over 30 years of this practice and being part of this community, being part of the leather community, being part of that world, I had accumulated a lot of experience and a lot of observation from being around people of things that I had never seen portrayed anywhere else. And I finally got the chance to build my own world. That's what an author gets to do. You know, you get to be the figure up in the sky pulling the strings that enables you to portray all the stuff that you've always wanted to see. What I did was I wrote the book that I wanted to read and had never found.
Well, only our authentic selves can succeed.
Yes.
So, a little bit of history.
Yes.
When it first came out, Story of O caused a major uproar and had to fight its way through the courts to be published in the United States. It's still an object of heated debate in many quarters. What makes it so controversial?
Well, of course, the idea that a woman could deliberately seek out total subjugation to a man, and I have to tell you that one of the flaws in the book is that the subjugation is so total, it's not very convincingly sold in light of the rather thin characters of the men involved. You would wonder why anyone would want to do that. But fundamentally, it deals with power dynamics between a man and a woman, and there is a tendency, especially in the politicized atmosphere of gender politics, to extrapolate from that to a sort of generalized view of relations between men and women. If you view it that way, yes, it's a very controversial book. If you view it as an example of a type of relationship that exists between certain types of people, then it's really not all that controversial, it's just different.
It was an interesting and rather daring decision to update an erotic classic set in post-war France to modern-day Los Angeles. What made you have that decision?
Well, I did a lot of scholarship on this book. I was very interested to find out how it came to be written, who wrote it. I found out quite a bit about that over the years. At first it was difficult because the author was in hiding over it for many years, but eventually toward the end of her life she came out and talked more openly about the circumstances in which it was created. And I'm also something of a history buff, and I saw a parallel between post-war Paris and modern Los Angeles. Both for reasons of a complicated political and economic nature were and are capitals of self-reinvention.
And popular culture.
Well, popular culture, of course, is the quickest and best way to reinvent yourself. That's what people do here all the time, and if you look at Paris, remember this book was written in Paris in 1954. Paris in 1954 was in a pretty tough place. It had had a pretty bad time during the war and the occupation. It had lost its imperial properties. It had lost much of its standing in the world. So it needed to find, as a culture, some new ways of making itself relevant. And the easiest, quickest, most obvious way to do that is through popular culture. So what did post-war Paris become the center of? All kinds of what were then new media, nouvelle vague in film, which means Francois Truffaut and Jean-Luc Godard, the modernist style of writing of Jean Genet and Jean-Paul Sartre, people of that kind, in fashion, in the work of Christian Dior, in film celebrities who were the celebrities of that time, Brigitte Bardot and Alain Delon. It was a place where you could put your past behind you and invent yourself as somebody new. Now, isn't that what goes on here in Los Angeles every single day?
Oh, yes.
Don't people come from everywhere here to become the person that they've always dreamed of being? And isn't popular culture, such as we have here, the vehicle that provides them that opportunity?
Bingo. Your book is filled with interesting offbeat characters, some of whom might be recognizable to contemporary readers. Are you pulling back the curtain on some secret vices?
If I were to do a thing like that, I would do it in such a fashion that the vices would become visible, but the secret aspect would remain. I do not whip and tell.
So we'll never know who's been at the end of your whip, I hear.
But you're welcome to conjecture.
Lovely.
I will neither confirm nor deny.
Your characters live in a world of luxurious consumerism that seems almost sexual in nature. Is that a deliberate connection or just fantasy wish fulfillment?
Well, of course, there's a measure of fantasy wish fulfillment in popular fiction of any kind, and I do think those things, people like to read about worlds that they're not likely to be able to inhabit or visit themselves, and that makes it more interesting. But there's also a more direct connection between consumerism and fetishism. Fetishism is the consumerism of sex, and there are many people for whom consumerism is a fetish in itself. There's a lot of overlap. These are all about the erotic qualities of objects. That's one of the things that is one of the things that fetishism does openly, but that fashion and merchandising subtly play upon without ever actually admitting that what they're trying to do is tickle your libido with this object.
That goes right into, so talking about objects and people with objects. Is this common practice to give yourself over to someone so much that you allow them to tattoo you or ring you as their property?
I wouldn't call it common. I would say that among people who identify as members of the BDSM community, these kinds of symbolic signifiers are, not uncommon, but they're not required either. It's not the kind of thing that automatically comes with the territory. And indeed, not everybody who has some kind of kinky body modification is a kinky person. It's an interesting thing. It cannot be assumed because
Yes.
somebody has a tattoo of a dominatrix on them, that
Right.
they really are into being dominated. It's just that they like the image. So there is an overlap between the body mod culture and the BDSM culture, but they are not interchangeable.
Got it. So Ernest, it's no secret that the community of BDSM players has experienced tremendous growth in recent years, and that it's developed its own set of rules and conventions. But though you show us that world, your characters don't always do it by the numbers. How do you think this book will be received by other kinksters?
That will depend on how doctrinaire they are about the rules and regulations. You know, when BDSM first began to emerge from the closet, it did so somewhat defensively. And part of the defense was to say, well, these are the ironclad rules by which we do this that make it safe and ethical and okay to do. Now that there are lots more different people with differing orientations involved in this, and now that it's become pretty clear that it doesn't represent a menace to society or make you a bad person, there is room for individuals to adjust those rules in a way that suits them. And I think some people are going to say, well, these people don't talk about consent and they don't negotiate and so on and so forth. These are very advanced BDSM players who've been doing it for years, in which 5 minutes of conversation establishes all the negotiated limits that you need to have.
Like I say, Thelonious Monk and Miles Davis got together. They would not need to discuss the history of jazz theory to be able to have a darn fine time.
Exactly.
So no other book has ever described sadomasochistic sex in such minute and authentic detail. Do you think that will change the way people view this kind of sex play?
I hope so, because one of the things I wanted to do is to make it less scary. I don't think it's very scary here. It's not played as a weird circus freak spooky thing, not too different from serial killers. No, the fact of the matter is there is very little pain, very little violence, very little danger involved in the vast majority of it, BDSM play. It's a little spanking, it's a little bondage, it's a little role playing. That is fine for most people, and that's mostly, I would say that's 99% of what the BDSM play out there in the world is all about. It's sex games, it's sex play between consenting adults. It is not a spooky, dangerous thing. And what I really wanted to do with this book was to take people behind that door that always closes before you see what it is they actually do.
No other book has ever described sadomasochistic sex in such minute and authentic detail. Do you think that it will change the way people view this kind of sex play?
I certainly hope so. One of the things I wanted to do with this book was to open the closed door, the door that always closes before people get down to doing whatever it is that they actually do. And I think that if people who had not seen it saw what they actually did, they would not be shocked and appalled. They'd go, gee, that looks like fun. It looks like they're having fun and getting off and enjoying themselves. That is why we do it.
No other book has ever described sadomasochistic sex in such minute and authentic detail. Do you think that will change the way people view this kind of sex play?
I hope so. A big part of my intention here was to open the door so people could get a look at what it is that we really do.
What would you tell non-kink oriented readers about why they should find this book interesting and why should they read it?
Why do you want to know about any culture that is part of your society but unfamiliar to you? Curiosity is part of the reason. You might have some curiosity based on the subject matter, or you just might be curious about who these people are, who you may have seen around and heard something about. I hope to appeal to both readers who are already, in one way or another, interested in BDSM and things about it, but also readers who are generally interested in the society that surrounds that. I had a bigger message here too.
For the armchair sociologist?
Yeah.
Anthropologist?
Right, exactly. It's partially a story about these people and their lives, and it's partially a story about modern Los Angeles and its life. Los Angeles is a character in this book.
Oh yes, oh yes. The book Master of Oath seems to straddle many genres. It's certainly an explicit sex story. It's also an examination of some very unusual relationships. Los Angeles itself seems like a character in the book. How did you blend such a complex mixture of elements, and toward what end?
I've always been a big fan of the LA Noir school of writing. In all of its manifestations, whether it's Raymond Chandler or James M. Cain or Joan Didion, anyone who has looked at the capital of America's popular culture and seen its bright and dark sides is likely to, as a writer, to want to use that rich material as a backdrop for a dramatic story. So what I wanted to create here was something that crossed over genres, a sort of hard-boiled noir romance. I know it sounds strange, but take my word for it, it's possible.
There's true love in this story. I read it. What is the single most important thing you would want readers to take away from Master of O?
That dominant men have inner lives, that they are not simply products of their sexuality. Many of them, I think, might resist having that known, and I'm sorry if I offend anyone by revealing trade secrets in that way, but actually, when you get down to it, a sadomasochistic relationship is still a relationship. That was the story I wanted to tell.
So one of the themes in BDSM relationships is the playing around with the idea of being owned.
Yes.
So why would someone want to have more than one master or be traded with no say in the matter? And there's a quote in the book, O didn't mind being traded back and forth between them like a bicycle to be ridden at will. So why would someone want to do that?
Well, in the book, the question is raised about whether or not this simply provides an alibi for a person to have a whole lot of different kinds of sex with a whole lot of different kinds of people and not take responsibility for it. There is that element in it. But I also think it's true that in terms of a gesture, you do not own that which you cannot give. And in the same way, you cannot give that which you do not own. Interestingly enough, unlike a lot of later BDSM literature in which certain kinds of symbolic behaviors become the essence of the dominant-submissive dynamic, the dominant-submissive dynamic in the original story of O was primarily about O's master's ability to put her at the disposal of anyone he pleased, himself or other, at any time. That was a great fantasy for her, and it was a great fantasy for him, and it was the way in which their power exchange worked. All are different. Everyone makes their own.
O is submissive to her masters in her private life, but in her professional life she is a strong, independent businesswoman. Is this the norm in the lifestyle?
I certainly have found it to be. I have found that women who enjoy being submissive in a sexual sense are often quite assertive in every other way. When you consider the messages that society gives women about wanting submissive sex, it takes a certain amount of rugged individualism to say, I don't care if it's politically correct. I don't care if I'm supposed to like it. I'm going to do this.
Well, yes, you had one of your first wife who was very independent-minded, and one of the things that when you were courting me, you told me that she told you, as a strong modern woman, I demand to be controlled. And I just loved that. Seeming contradiction, I demand to be controlled. But it's a lovely vacation. Speaking as someone who is herself, you're submissive,
yes,
and you're a happily collared wife. It is a nice relaxation that comes from, for the next hour and a half or so, I don't have to make any decision. It's got to be a good time, and then leave that all into your hands, and it's sort of relaxing.
I think almost anyone dealing with the stresses and pressures of modern life can find it a brief vacation not to have to make every possible decision every minute, because we're called upon to make decisions every minute in our lives, and it's nice to be able to say, well, for a little while, somebody else gets to take the wheel. If you are oriented in that way, it's not for everyone.
Is there a personality that is generally drawn to wanting to be a submissive or play from the submissive role?
Having known so many who were so different for so many years, I would hesitate to make any kind of a generalization about them, other than the fact that they all had very different personalities, but they were strong personalities. They were assertive personalities. The notion of submissive as doormat is strictly a cliche thought up by people who've never met one. If you've ever met one, one thing you'll find out real quick is that they have plenty to say. They have plenty of opinions, they know what they want, and for the most part, they'll let you know.
So it's an open secret that you and I are in an open relationship, mm-hmm, and we regularly share play time with other women and couples. So it's interesting to note about the master-slave ownership relationship is that in the book there's no jealousy. How do people in the lifestyle manage to turn off the jealousy and enjoy the experience?
Well, it depends on the people, because that's not a template for every kind of BDSM or master-slave relationship that there is. There is no such template. And when people seek a template in this book or any other book, they're going to quickly find out that they'll have to write their own book because it won't work. There are plenty of monogamous couples in the BDSM world. There are plenty of people who are very, very selective about partners and really only want to be with a certain kind of person, and when with that person, don't want that person to be with anybody else. There is some overlap with the polyamorous culture because we're dealing with people who are sexually experimental. And they may like to experiment with more than just BDSM. They may also want to experiment with non-monogamy or polyamory. But the two things are not inextricably interwoven. They're different matters.
So obviously one of our relationship requirements was to be in a non-exclusive sexual relationship. So how do people in the lifestyle manage to turn off the jealousy and enjoy the experience?
Not all do. It is not a given that BDSM people will also be non-monogamous. I would say that of the BDSM committed couples I've done over the years, the majority of them were monogamous. But it is a sexually experimental community, people who are willing to try new things, and there is some overlap between those who have an interest in BDSM and those who have an interest in non-monogamy and polyamory. But it doesn't apply in every case. Nothing applies in every case.
Master of O is a great, big, thick, fabulous beach read of a book. How would you like people to use the book in their personal lives, to enhance their personal lives?
As a big, fat, fun beach read, it's a fairy tale about a certain kind of people in a certain time and place in Los Angeles, and it's got some very realistic elements in it, but it is a story. It is fiction. It is not meant to be prescriptive in any way. I don't want to even be drawn into the argument over whether or not it's a good influence. If you're deciding what kind of sex you're going to have and what kind of sexuality you're going to build into your life on the basis of what you read in a novel, you got worse problems than we can solve with a novel. The fact of the matter is, it's a story about some people. It's fiction. It's not real. It is not prescriptive, and it's not meant to be. I never had it in mind to write a book to tell people how to do this. I've done that on camera. I've done that in other situations. I do that in workshops. I'm not doing that here. My role here is to entertain.
And boy, does he ever. Ladies, telling you, but I'm biased. So, Ernest, how would you like people to use this book?
I would hope that they would find it an enlightening, interesting, offbeat view of some aspect of modern life, but use it? Well, if they want to use it to hold up a bookshelf, that's fine with me. If they want to use it to read on the beach and go, that's interesting, but I'd never do it, that's fine too. I never set out to write a prescriptive book about how to build your own kinky sex life. Not my job in this case, strictly fiction.
So, Ernest, in a nutshell, how do you want people to use this book?
In a sense, it's more important how I don't want them to use it. I never set out to write a prescriptive book about how to construct a BDSM or master-slave relationship. That's a whole other thing in a whole other part of life. It's a fairy tale, a dark fairy tale about modern Los Angeles and a certain class of people that exists here. It's meant to be read as fiction, and my job is to entertain.
So, Ernest, for someone who is new to this, as I once was, the idea that can be so scary because it seems so big and undoable, what do you say to that person?
Not to worry, that kink sex is like a great big amusement park, and it has all kinds of different rides in it. Some of those rides are smooth and fun and easy, and some of them are kind of scary and challenging, but you're a guest in that park, and you get to choose what you like. No one need feel that they have to prove that they are more leather than thou, more intense than thou. There is some of that kind of competition among people in the community, but that is not a requirement. The idea here is to find what turns you on, what you like, no more, no less.
So the sex in Master of O is at a very high level, and some people would consider it extreme. What do you say to those naysayers out there who worry about, but the children, what if they see this book?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that they shouldn't.
They shouldn't see it. It's a grown-up fairy tale for grown-ups. I did not write it for people who are not of age to be able to consider sexuality in a grown-up light. However, it is a fact of history, all through human history until the very modern age, that young people saw what went on in the world around them probably more clearly and graphically than they do in the relatively cosseted societies we've created for them since. And I don't think that that necessarily damages them or necessarily alters the way in which their own sexuality develops. We are all different personalities, and we're going to like what we're going to like. We're not going to like what we're not going to like, and I do not believe that reading a book is going to change anything fundamental about anybody in that department. It goes a lot deeper than that. So overall, do I think that having BDSM visible in the culture is a dangerous influence? No, I don't. And I think that those who hold that view probably hold that view about gay people and every other kind of non-conforming sexuality. I think that they're worrying about the wrong thing. I worry about prejudice. That's a problem that they should take on first.
Thank you, Ernest. That was actually very interesting. And where can people find Master of O?
They can find Master of O at masterofo.com. And they can also obtain it through Daedalus Publishing, the courageous and heroic individuals who gave me the opportunity to bring this vision to the world. So yes, masterofo.com. Buy it for yourself, buy it for your friends, buy it for fun.
Well, thank you.
My pleasure.